Captain Ethan Cole had broken into many illegal ships before, but the silence inside this one felt wrong. The massive alien slave vessel drifted near a dead star, its hull scarred by old battles and forgotten crimes. No emergency lights. No alarms. Just darkness. Ethan moved slowly through the metal corridor, his boots echoing softly. His helmet scanner showed life signs ahead, weak, fading, and locked behind heavy energy doors. Slave ship, he thought. Another den of monsters hiding in the shadows of space. He tightened his grip on his plasma rifle and moved forward, unaware that this mission would change his life and the balance of the galaxy forever. For humans, slavery was a crime written into history as a scar never to be repeated. Ethan had grown up hearing those lessons, not as stories of pride, but as warnings. That was why he took contracts no one else wanted. He hunted pirates, broke smuggling rings, and freed prisoners when he could. But this ship felt different. The air was cold, heavier than normal, and every step felt like he was walking into something forbidden. His scanner beeped again. 3 life forms. Female. Alien. Barely alive. The prison chamber doors stood before him, carved with alien symbols glowing faint red. Ethan forced them open with an override pulse, and the smell hit him first: burned metal, fear, and suffering. Inside, 3 alien women were chained to the wall by glowing restraint fields. Their bodies were thin, marked with scars and control implants. Their eyes lifted slowly toward him, not with hope, but with sharp awareness. That made Ethan pause. Slaves usually begged. These women did not. The first one met his gaze without fear. Her skin shimmered with soft silver patterns, dull from exhaustion but still beautiful. The second leaned forward slightly, studying him like a puzzle. The third remained quiet, her eyes closed, but her posture was calm, almost disciplined. Ethan had seen broken prisoners before. These were not broken. They were restrained. "I'm human," Ethan said carefully, lowering his weapon. "I'm here to get you out." The words echoed in the chamber. The women exchanged brief looks, silent but meaningful. No panic. No disbelief. Only calculation. That sent a chill through Ethan's spine. Still, he moved quickly, disabling the restraint fields one by one. The moment the chains dropped, the third woman opened her eyes. They were a deep, glowing violet, sharp and commanding. For a brief second, Ethan felt like he was the one standing in chains. Before he could speak again, heavy footsteps thundered outside the chamber. Alien guards, tall, armored, and armed with shock spears, charged in, shouting in their harsh language. Ethan reacted instantly. The corridor filled with plasma fire and sparks. He moved like a storm, precise and ruthless. Humans might not be the strongest species in the galaxy, but they were adaptable, relentless, and dangerous when cornered. Within seconds, the guards lay silent on the floor. The alien women watched without surprise. That bothered him more than the fight. "Can you walk?" Ethan asked, offering his hand. The silver-skinned woman accepted it, her grip firm despite her injuries. "Yes," she said in perfect galactic common. Her voice was calm, controlled. Educated. That single word raised more questions than answers. As they moved through the ship, alarms finally began to scream. Ethan led them through maintenance shafts and broken cargo bays, fighting off guards as they came. The women followed closely, never slowing him down, never screaming, never panicking. At one point, the quiet one reached out and touched a control panel, disabling a security field with a movement too precise for chance. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. They reached his ship just as the slave vessel began to burn. Explosions ripped through its hull, lighting space with fire. As Ethan powered up the engines, he glanced back through the cockpit window. The 3 women stood together, watching the destruction. The silver-skinned one looked relieved. The second looked thoughtful. The third smiled. Not a smile of freedom. A smile of return. Suddenly, Ethan's comm system crackled with an incoming alien transmission, breaking through all channels. The voice on the other end was sharp, furious, and filled with authority. "Attention all forces!" it roared. "Priority command. The royal prisoners have escaped. Repeat, do not let the princesses leave the system." Ethan froze. Slowly, he turned to look at the women behind him. Captain Ethan Cole did not ask questions as his ship jumped into deep space because instinct had already begun screaming at him that the answers would be dangerous. The alien women stood behind him in the dim blue light of the cockpit, no longer chained, no longer weak, and no longer hiding their awareness. The engines hummed as the stars stretched into lines and vanished, yet the silence inside the ship felt heavier than any gravity Ethan had ever known. He had rescued slaves before, but none of them had stood so calmly on a human warship, as if they belonged there, as if escape was never in doubt. The silver-skinned woman moved first, stepping closer to the navigation console, her balance perfect despite injuries that should have left her shaking. She studied the star map with focused eyes and then looked at Ethan, not with gratitude but with evaluation, as if she were measuring his worth. He felt it then, a strange pressure in the air, not physical but commanding, a presence that did not need words. Ethan kept his voice steady when he spoke, telling them they were safe for now and that human space was still several jumps away. The quiet one finally spoke, her tone smooth and controlled, asking how long it would take for the nearest fleet to track them. Her English was flawless, not learned but trained, and that made Ethan narrow his eyes. He answered honestly, saying alien empires had technology far beyond human sensors, and if they wanted to find them they would. The second woman tilted her head slightly and said that they would not send hunters, they would send an armada. Ethan felt a chill run through him because her voice held no fear, only certainty. He realized then that these women had never believed they would die on that slave ship they had been waiting. As the ship moved through hyperspace, Ethan noticed small changes that did not match random chance. Power levels stabilized without his input, course corrections adjusted at perfect timing, and life support balanced itself more efficiently than his systems usually allowed. When he turned sharply, the quiet woman had her hand near the auxiliary panel, not touching it yet. Somehow the system responded. Ethan did not shout, did not threaten. He simply asked how she did that. The silver-skinned woman answered that survival required adaptation, and adaptation required knowledge. She said it like a lesson, not an excuse. Ethan told them humans did not enslave and did not betray the innocent, and for the first time one of them reacted. The second woman looked at him closely, her eyes glowing faintly, as if reading something deeper than words. She asked him why he risked his life for strangers when the galaxy would have rewarded him for selling them back. Ethan answered without pause, because some lines do not move, and that response changed the air in the ship. The pressure eased, not vanished, but shifted like a storm, pulling back. Minutes passed in silence until the ship alarm sounded, not a warning but a detection. The quiet woman spoke before the system finished processing, saying the Empire had marked them already and that escape was no longer possible through speed alone. Ethan cursed under his breath and began plotting evasive routes, but she stepped closer and told him not to waste fuel. The silver-skinned woman finally revealed a fragment of truth, saying their mother would not stop searching, not across systems, not across decades, not across bloodlines. Ethan demanded to know who their mother was, and the answer came slowly, not spoken as a name, but as a title that carried weight like gravity. The Queen. Ethan felt his chest tighten because every spacer and commander in known space knew that title, the ruler of the most powerful alien empire, the destroyer of worlds, the voice behind countless vanished civilizations. He realized then that the transmission from the slave ship was not about property, it was about royalty. The women he saved were not victims abandoned to rot, they were leverage stolen from a throne built on fear. The second woman stepped forward and said that the ones who sold them believed humans were weak and forgettable. They believed no one would notice 3 royal daughters disappearing into chains. She said they were wrong about humans, and she said it with something close to respect. Ethan laughed once, short and sharp, because the galaxy had just dropped its greatest war onto his flight path, and there was no turning back now. As the stars shifted again, and another jump prepared, the quiet woman looked directly at Ethan and said their rescue had already changed fate. She said the Queen would come, and when she did, humanity would be tested not by weapons but by choice. The jump drive engaged, and space folded around them, carrying not just a ship but a decision that would echo across the stars. The galaxy had many rulers, but only one was spoken of in silence, and Captain Ethan Cole now understood why. As his ship drifted at the edge of an unclaimed system, while distant lights gathered like a rising storm, the alien women no longer hid who they were, because hiding no longer served a purpose. The silver-skinned one stood tall despite her wounds, her posture straight and regal, as if invisible armor surrounded her. She told Ethan that fear was the language of empires and that her mother had perfected it over centuries. Ethan listened without interrupting, because when someone spoke of a monster with calm respect, it meant the truth was far worse. The Queen was not born into power. She had taken it world by world, fleet by fleet, betrayal by betrayal. Her empire stretched across star clusters where law was her voice and mercy was rare. She ruled not because she shouted the loudest, but because she never needed to speak twice. Entire civilizations had vanished after refusing her will, and the galaxy learned quickly that survival meant obedience. Ethan had heard stories before, exaggerated spacer myths told over bad drinks, but hearing it from her daughter made every tale feel small. The second woman stepped forward and revealed what the galaxy did not know, that the Queen had daughters not as symbols but as heirs, trained from birth in diplomacy, warfare, and command. They were taught to observe, not react, to endure, not beg, and to never show weakness to those who would use it. The slave ship had not broken them because chains meant nothing to minds shaped for survival. They had waited because waiting was power, and escape was inevitable once opportunity appeared. Ethan demanded to know why they were sold into slavery, and the quiet one answered without hesitation, saying, "Power invites envy, and envy creates traitors." Noble houses within the empire believed removing the heirs would fracture the throne. They sold the daughters quietly, believing the Queen would never suspect her own blood could be taken. That assumption was their greatest mistake. Ethan realized then that the galaxy was already burning. He just had not seen the flames yet. Long-range sensors flared as hyperspace ruptures bloomed across the system. Ethan watched in silence as massive silhouettes emerged far beyond human scale. The fleet did not rush forward, it positioned itself perfectly, sealing exits, controlling space itself. This was not a search, it was a claim. The Queen had arrived, and she did not need speed to prove her authority. She knew there was nowhere to run. Human command channels exploded with alerts and warnings as the presence was detected across nearby systems. Panic spread fast because humanity had never faced a force like this, not openly, not directly, not with intent. Ethan opened a channel to human command, reporting everything, because lies would only get people killed. He told them who was coming and why. The response was chaos, debate, fear, and finally silence as the truth settled. The silver-skinned woman watched the human transmissions with interest. She had expected hesitation, expected betrayal, expected humans to choose survival over principle. Instead, she saw confusion, fear, and something else: resolve. Ethan received orders to retreat to human space if possible and abandon the cargo. The word cargo made his jaw tighten. He shut off the channel and stood still for a long moment. Then he spoke, saying humans did not abandon people, and certainly not those they freed. The second woman studied him carefully and asked if he understood what refusing meant. He answered that he did, and that some choices defined who you were more than how long you lived. That answer carried weight heavier than weapons. The quiet one nodded once, as if confirming a calculation long completed. She said that if humans stood their ground, history would remember them, even if they fell. The fleet moved closer, not firing, not threatening, simply existing with overwhelming certainty. The Queen did not send demands because she did not negotiate with what she believed would break. Ethan felt the pressure in his chest, the instinct to kneel, to surrender, to survive, and he pushed it down because humanity had faced extinction before, and fear had never saved them. He ordered his ship to hold position and transmitted a single message on open frequency stating that the rescued were under human protection and would not be surrendered. There was no insult, no challenge, only fact. The silence that followed was vast and terrible. Then a new signal appeared, not from a fleet, not from a weapon, but from a single source. A presence filled the channel, ancient, controlled, and absolute. The Queen was listening, and the galaxy held its breath. The silence after Ethan's message felt heavier than the cold of space, as if the universe itself waited to see whether humans would bend or break. The massive alien fleet remained still, surrounding the system like a steel horizon. Each ship was a moving fortress, older than most human nations and built with a confidence that came from never being challenged. Ethan stood at the center of his cockpit, knowing that one wrong move could erase everything he had ever known. Humanity had never been strong in the way empires measured strength, but it had survived because it refused to disappear quietly. Human command channels reconnected, filled with strained voices and overlapping orders. Some demanded immediate withdrawal, others argued that surrender might prevent annihilation. No one spoke of victory because no one could see a path to it. Ethan listened and then cut the noise away, because leadership was not found in consensus. During moments like this, it was found in choice. He transmitted a simple report stating that the alien women were not cargo, not weapons, and not bargaining tools. They were People under human protection, and he would not move. The silver-skinned princess watched the human signals with a careful gaze. She had expected fear to turn into betrayal because that was how most species survived. Empires taught obedience, not courage, yet the longer the human channels stayed open, the more she saw something unfamiliar. Hesitation mixed with resolve. Humans argued loudly, but none of them spoke of handing the prisoners over easily. They spoke of law, of history, and of who they wanted to be. When this moment ended, her posture shifted slightly, and for the first time doubt touched her expression. The fleet moved again, not aggressively, but deliberately, tightening its control over space. Human sensor screens flooded with warnings showing how completely outmatched they were. Even the smallest alien vessel could crush a human cruiser with ease. Ethan ordered his ship to remain steady, refusing to give the fleet the satisfaction of watching him retreat. Fear crawled through him, but he kept his voice level because panic spread faster than fire. A human task force began to arrive, battered ships patched with old armor and stubborn hope. They were not enough, and everyone knew it, but they came anyway. Each arrival added a small weight to the system, like stones stacked against a tidal wave. The princesses watched silently as human vessels formed a defensive line, not to threaten but to stand, their weapons powered up, not with expectation of victory but with acceptance of consequence. The second princess turned to Ethan and asked why humans were doing this when logic demanded surrender. Ethan answered that logic had never built anything worth saving. He said humans were small because they chose to be, because they believed strength was more than domination. The quiet princess studied the human fleet, then slowly lowered herself to one knee in front of Ethan. Her movement was smooth, controlled, and shocking. The silver-skinned one followed, then the second, until all three stood kneeling on the metal floor of a human ship. Ethan stared, unable to speak, because he understood what that meant. Royal kneeling was not weakness, it was recognition. She said that in her culture, kneeling before another species acknowledged moral authority above power. She said humans had earned that moment through choice alone. Ethan told her to stand because humans did not demand submission. She rose, and something changed between them, not alliance, not friendship, but respect. The alien fleet responded. At last a signal spread across every channel, carrying the weight of a ruler who had never been denied. The voice did not shout, did not threaten. It asked one question: why do you protect what is not yours? The system fell silent, waiting for Ethan's answer, because in that moment he spoke for all of humanity. He answered that no one owned another being and that humans protected the innocent because someone once failed to protect them. He said history taught them that survival without honor was just a slower death. The response took time, and that delay was more terrifying than immediate violence. Human crews prepared for the end, saying quiet goodbyes and setting final commands. The princesses stood beside Ethan, watching the species that refused to kneel, even when faced with extinction. The alien fleet weapons powered but did not fire. Instead, the signal returned, carrying something unexpected: restraint. The queen had heard not just defiance but conviction, and that was something rare enough to pause even her. The galaxy waited as humanity stood small against infinite force, knowing that regardless of the outcome, this moment would echo forever. The moment stretched beyond time as human and alien fleets faced each other in absolute stillness. No weapons fired, no commands shouted, only the quiet hum of power systems ready to end everything. Captain Ethan Cole felt the weight of billions of human lives pressing down on his breath, because the next words spoken would decide more than survival. They would decide meaning. The three princesses stood beside him, no longer as prisoners or guests, but as witnesses to a choice no other species had dared to make. The Queen's presence filled every channel, not as sound but as authority. When her voice came, it was calm and measured, asking Ethan why he continued to resist when surrender would cost him nothing compared to annihilation. Her words were not cruel, they were practical, shaped by centuries of rule. Ethan answered slowly, knowing every word mattered. He said surrender would cost humanity its future, because a species that trades souls for safety loses the right to exist. The statement carried no anger, only certainty, and that made it dangerous. Human command remained silent, listening, because for the first time the decision was not theirs. It belonged to the individual who stood at the edge of extinction and refused to step back. The silver-skinned princess watched Ethan with focused attention, because this was the moment she had been trained for her entire life. Negotiation at the edge of power, yet this was not negotiation, this was something unfamiliar. The Queen offered terms then: protection, alliance, resources, and favor beyond measure. If the daughters were returned unharmed, it was everything lesser empires dreamed of receiving. Ethan refused without hesitation. He said humanity did not trade lives for rewards, no matter how great. The galaxy had never heard such words spoken to the Queen and lived. The princesses reacted instantly, stepping forward, declaring their willingness to return voluntarily if it would spare humanity. The quiet ones said their lives were theirs to give, and Ethan understood the honor in that offer but rejected it. He told them, humans did not survive by sacrificing the innocent, even when the innocent offered themselves. The Queen fell silent again, and that silence shook the fleet more than any weapon activation. Alien commanders waited for fury, for destruction, for the familiar pattern of punishment. Instead, the Queen asked another question, softer and far more dangerous. She asked Ethan if humans believed themselves superior. He answered no. He said humans believed themselves responsible for their actions, for their choices, and for those who could not protect themselves. That answer struck something deep. Because responsibility was a burden rulers often avoided. The Queen requested proof not of strength but of conviction. Ethan transmitted records, human laws outlawing slavery, human wars fought to end it, and human history filled with failure, regret, and repeated attempts to be better. He did not present humanity as perfect, only persistent. The princesses watched their mother absorb this information, and for the first time in their lives they sensed hesitation, not doubt but consideration. Across the human fleet fear remained, but it was steady now, shaped into resolve. Crews understood they might die, but they would die as themselves, not as survivors of surrender. The Queen finally spoke again, her voice carrying something new, curiosity. She asked Ethan what he would do if she ordered the fleet to fire. He answered simply that humans would stand until the end, because some moments defined a species more than survival ever could. That answer echoed across alien command structures because it was irrational by every imperial standard. Empires survived by bending, others survived by adapting, humanity survived by choosing meaning. The Queen issued a command and the galaxy held its breath, expecting annihilation. Instead, the alien fleet powered down its weapons. A single order halted destruction across thousands of ships in perfect unison. The Queen declared judgment not on humanity but on her own empire. She named the noble houses responsible for the betrayal and marked them for immediate execution across all systems. The announcement rippled through space like a shockwave. Because the Queen had never publicly admitted internal corruption, the princesses stood frozen as their mother chose justice over convenience, something even they had not expected. She then declared a moratorium on slavery across her empire, pending full eradication, not as mercy but as law enforced by absolute authority. The human fleet did not cheer because they understood the gravity of what had happened. A single human refusal had forced the most powerful ruler in the galaxy to confront her own legacy. The Queen addressed Ethan one final time, stating that humanity had passed a test it did not know it was taking. She said the galaxy would remember this choice, and so would she. The transmission ended and the alien fleet slowly withdrew, leaving humans alive, changed, and marked forever by the moment they chose. The withdrawal of the alien fleet did not bring relief at first, because silence after survival can feel more dangerous than battle. Captain Ethan Cole stood motionless, watching the distant lights fade as ships that could have erased humanity turned away without firing a single shot around him. The human fleet remained cautious, engines hot, weapons ready, unsure whether mercy was real or only delayed destruction. Humanity had been spared, but no one yet understood the price of that moment. A new transmission opened, not wide, not broadcast, but direct, a private channel from the Queen herself. The signal carried no threat, no command, only presence. Ethan accepted, knowing refusal would mean nothing. The Queen appeared as a towering holographic form, ancient and composed, her eyes carrying the weight of centuries. She did not sit upon a throne, she did not surround herself with guards, she faced him alone, and that alone carried meaning. She spoke slowly, saying judgment had been passed, not lightly and not without consequence. The traitor houses had already fallen, their fleets seized, their leaders executed, their names erased from imperial record. Power within her empire had shifted in a single breath, because betrayal could not be allowed to fracture control. She explained this not as justification, but as fact. Ethan listened, understanding that rulers like her did not seek approval. The Queen then addressed the subject of slavery. Her empire had built itself on efficiency, control, and dominance. Slavery had been tolerated because it served order. She admitted this without apology, but then stated that order without moral boundary led to rot. The human refusal had forced her to confront that truth. She declared that slavery would be dismantled systematically, not as an act of kindness but as reform, enforced by absolute law. Those who resisted would be removed. This was not negotiation, it was decree. Across the galaxy, shock spread faster than light. Entire economies built on chains collapsed overnight. Worlds once silent erupted into unrest, and hoped the princesses listened in disbelief because even they had not believed their mother would go this far. The silver-skinned one felt something she had never allowed herself to feel, pride not in power but in change. The queen turned her attention back to Ethan and asked him a question that no subject had ever been allowed to ask her. She asked him what he expected in return. Humanity had stood against annihilation without asking for reward. Ethan answered that he expected nothing. He said humans did not act to be paid, they acted so they could live with themselves. The queen studied him for a long moment, and then did something unprecedented. She smiled. Not wide, not warm, but real. She declared that humanity would be recognized as a protected civilization under imperial law. No empire world would be permitted to enslave humans or raid their systems without invoking her direct wrath. This protection was not alliance, not ownership, but acknowledgement. Humanity would stand on its own, but no longer alone. The galaxy heard that declaration and adjusted its behavior immediately. The queen then addressed her daughters. Her voice softened only slightly as she told them they were free to choose their path. They could return home, take their place as heirs, or walk among the stars as they wished. The quiet one stepped forward and said they would return in time, but not yet. She said they wished to understand humans better. The queen did not object. She simply nodded, accepting their choice because she had learned that authority did not always require control. As the transmission ended, Ethan felt the weight lift, not completely, but enough to breathe. Human ships began to power down, crews finally allowing themselves to believe they had survived. The princesses stood beside Ethan, no longer as symbols of danger, but as bridges between worlds. News spread quickly across human space, turning fear into stunned disbelief. Humanity had faced the strongest empire in the galaxy, and had not been erased, not because of weapons, not because of numbers, but because of conviction. The story would be told and retold, changing how humans saw themselves and how others measured them. Ethan looked out into the stars, knowing this was not an ending but a beginning. The queen's judgment had reshaped the galaxy, but humanity would now be watched more closely than ever. Respect carried its own danger, yet for the first time in a long time the future felt earned, not stolen, and that made all the difference. The galaxy did not change in a single day, but it shifted the way mountains shift slowly and forever. After the Queen's judgment, the stars seemed the same, yet every major power began to reassess what humanity represented. Captain Ethan Cole returned to human space not as a hero seeking praise, but as a man carrying a story too large for one voice. Still, the story spread because truth has weight, and this truth rewrote expectations. Human worlds reacted first with disbelief, then with quiet pride. There were no parades at first, only long discussions in councils, classrooms, and command halls. Humanity had survived not by winning a war but by refusing to lose itself. That lesson settled deep, especially among those who had believed strength meant dominance. The younger generations listened most carefully because they would inherit the consequences of this moment. Across alien space, slaver guilds collapsed, entire markets vanished as imperial enforcement arrived without warning. Chains were broken not gently but absolutely because the Queen's decree allowed no delay. Former slaves looked to humanity not as saviors but as proof that defiance was possible. The idea spread faster than fleets ever could because ideas do not need fuel. The three princesses became something new, ambassadors not appointed by treaty but by trust. They walked human stations and colonies, learning how a species so fragile had stood against extinction without bending. They observed how humans argued openly, disagreed fiercely, and still stood together when it mattered most of all. They learned that humans did not worship power, they questioned it even when it came wrapped in protection. Ethan returned to a quieter life, refusing command offers and political positions. He understood that legends belonged to history, not to the living, yet his name appeared in training simulations, ethical debates, and command studies, not because he was perfect, but because he had chosen responsibility when no one would have blamed him for choosing survival. That choice became a reference point for future decisions across human space. Other empires watched carefully. Some feared humanity, others dismissed them as lucky. A few understood the truth: humanity was dangerous not because of its weapons but because of its values. A species that would die rather than betray would eventually find allies who would die beside it. That kind of power could not be bought or controlled. Years passed and human influence grew not through conquest but through presence. They were invited into negotiations, asked to mediate conflicts, and trusted with responsibilities far beyond their fleet strength, because when humans gave their word they had proven it meant something even under the shadow of annihilation. The queen watched from afar, measuring the long arc of consequence. Her empire remained strong but changed more than it had in centuries. She did not regret her decision because stability built on fear alone eventually fractures. Humanity had reminded her of something ancient, that authority must answer to principle or be consumed by its own weight. The princesses eventually returned home, carrying with them an understanding that power without conscience was incomplete. They spoke of humans often not as equals in strength, but as equals in worth. That distinction altered how future leaders were trained and how decisions were weighed. In time, the story of the forbidden prison faded into legend, but its echo remained whenever a fleet faced an impossible choice, whenever a leader considered trading lives for advantage. The memory surfaced of a small human ship that refused to kneel and lived. Humanity did not become rulers of the galaxy, they became something rarer, a line that would not move, a species that proved survival was not the highest value, and in a universe ruled by fear that made them unforgettable.